you so much for joining us this morning for our first, I guess. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess I should ask.
Yep.
Maybe you use a function if you can hear me okay. Or say yes.
Yes, I can.
No, you're hard to hear.
Okay. I'll try to move my mic closer. Is that any better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I'm holding the microphone about 2 inches from my mouth. So I'll just work with that, and maybe if everyone can turn up their speakers, we can get through this. Okay. So once again, thank you so much for joining us for our first of 3 recovery webinar series. We're really excited to be doing this. Yeah, before I get going, there's still a lot of open mics, so I'm just going to go through and mute everyone, and then when we're done, I'll open it up for questions.
There we go.
Thank goodness there's no one today.
Please, once again, please mute your lines if you can on your side. It's a lot easier for you guys to do it than me to go through and do everyone's. I do want to just draw attention. We do have a chat feature, so throughout the presentation, if you have any quick questions, my awesome team is stood up to be able to answer those quick questions. But we will wait until the end if it's something you think for the group or something would just be easier to discuss out loud. We'll wait till the end for all of those, just because we're recording this. Okay, so here we go. Thanks for everyone for joining us for our first webinar of our 3-part series. This is our first year doing this, kind of pre-severe weather season, but we're hoping to make it an annual thing just for everyone's benefit with updates, changes, things like that. So when we're all done, we'll probably send out an email just to get some feedback from everyone, and that would be great if you guys could partake in that. Not going to keep anyone longer than an hour. My goal is just to keep this short and sweet. But I do want to say, if you hear something you want more information on, NEMA, Nebraska Emergency Management Agency, does offer what we call an EM 101, and we can come out to your organization, your jurisdiction, and do kind of a specialized presentation based on your needs or your interests. So keep that in mind when we're all done with this 3-part series. If you have more questions or need more information, keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, so for our 3-part webinar series today, we're just going to be talking about kind of high-level Recovery 101. We're going to briefly talk about phases, about the Public Assistance Program, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and then the bulk of the morning, we'll be just talking about the new delivery model. The next 2 webinars, next week, next Wednesday, same time, same place. Our recovery manager, Don Christensen, will be leading that one, and he'll be talking about the federal disaster declaration process. Preliminary damage assessments, there's just been kind of some updates and some changes in what that looks like for our locals, so we wanted to brief you guys on that. And then how to document and track costs. And then the third one is kind of more blue sky day. What you guys can be doing today to modify processes, to include methods that FEMA approves of, looking at procurement procedures and compliance. And then ultimately, we're going to hopefully get more people registered for the portal and kind of do a live walkthrough. You can see there's a little 2 and a little 3 throughout this presentation. I tried to put those numbers next to topics that will be addressed in the following weeks. So if I don't touch on it much, that's why. It's because someone will be discussing it in future weeks. But of course, if you have questions, like I said, please utilize the chat feature. Connor, Patrick, and Nick are all ready and waiting to answer questions, or we can just wait, and I'll unmute anyone at the end. We kind of talked about what we'll be talking about today, of course. I said we'll talk about questions at the end, but also a reminder, if you did only register one person and you have a group viewing, please put that in the chat so that the gentleman can track that for our metrics, or shoot us an email with the names of everyone attending. That would be great for us. Okay, so we're going to start off with the basics. Emergency management is typically looked at through 4 phases. We have mitigation, which here at NEMA is housed within the recovery section, and they just really focus on public education, hazard vulnerability, improving infrastructure, and planning as well. Moving into preparedness, that would include our local emergency operations plans for our local EMs, and also training and exercises. Response would be incident happens and responding. That's life safety, evacuation, sheltering, incident stabilization. Moving into recovery, infrastructure, looking at economic recovery, health and social services, and housing as well. Like I said, in NEMA, for those of you that here in the section, the operations section, and mitigation and recovery are both housed within the recovery section. So as far as the 2 programs that really, and I'll be brief on this because I know we have state, within our recovery section, focus public assistance side of the house, which we'll be talking about a lot today. Our disaster grants, that's fixing what's broken. That's typically federal funds, although there are state funds sometimes available, used to rebuild infrastructure, pay for emergency work, debris management, those types of things, just fixing what was broken. The other side of the house in our recovery section is focused on hazard mitigation, and that's, you can think of, but what about next time? And some of you have utilized our mitigation grants, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But really, that's what our recovery team focuses on every single day. So a little bit of context. I sometimes travel throughout Nebraska, and I hear from locals or just people saying, that never happens here. We don't have disasters here. So I had my wonderful IT genius put this together. So what you're looking at is federal disaster declarations in the state of Nebraska for the last 20 years. We've had 31 in the last 20 years, and that means we average just over 1.5 a year. Some years, as you know, we have more. In 2014, we had 3 federal disaster declarations. Last year, we had 2. So it really does just depend, but we're pretty good at getting federal declarations here. As you can see, on the southeast part of our state, the darker the color means you're in more disasters, and the lighter the color means less. As a region, our FEMA Region 7, which includes Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, we actually average the highest quantity of disasters. So not the highest dollar amounts, of course, our hurricane states win that category. But sheer amount and sheer quantity, we actually here in Region 7 get the most disasters. And once again, if you just joined us, please mute your lines. I'm getting some background noise. We're going to be really discussing the public assistance program. Within the state of Nebraska and nationwide as well. eligible applicants include our municipalities, our state agencies, certain nonprofits, entities, and our quasi-state entities like our NRDs. And our tribal governments as well. So as you can see, we have 7 categories of work. The first 2 is our emergency work. That's our. Can everyone please mute your line?
Yeah, but like for the.
Yeah, HMI is coming up here.
Okay.
Just a second, everyone.
Right.
There we go. Thank you.
E. Johnson, I'm just.
Okay. Emergency work, that's our debris removal and our Cat B emergency protective measures. Typically, we have 6 months to complete those things. For Category B, the emergency protective measures, that includes different things like search and rescue, emergency mass care, emergency evacuations, security and disaster areas. It could include temporary generators for facilities, provide health and safety services, and also flood protection, like barricading, sandbagging, temporary levees, things like that. The second category is our permanent work, which covers measures needed to restore or replace property. And that includes categories C through G. That's our roads and bridges, water control systems, Cat E, disposal equipment, Cat F, electrical systems, and the last one's parks, and kind of what else doesn't fit in the other categories. So right now is probably the best time to bring up what everyone has known up until this point is what now we are referring to and FEMA is referring to as the legacy model. So the processes that everyone that has been in a federal disaster declaration or your experiences that you went through so far, please realize those will probably be different moving forward, and we will be discussing that. But just keep in mind that what has happened in the past is going to be different, and I would just, I guess, on behalf of FEMA, which I don't typically say, we're keeping an open mind about this new model, and I would encourage everyone to do the same because I think that it will be a positive change. As far as small versus large projects, moving into fiscal year 2018, our threshold for a large and small project is $125,500, and what that means is for small projects, so anything below that threshold, this year, we will be able to pay that federal share, the 75%, as soon as it's obligated, and anything above the 125, of course, like our prior legacy model, we will have to wait until we have documentation to prove the costs. Okay. So at the most basic level, this is the public assistance process. It starts off Blue Sky Days, and here I would encourage you to look at webinar 3. But essentially, our disaster event happens, and we look at doing preliminary damage assessments. If we do hit our state threshold, which, like I said, Donnie will discuss next week, the governors will request a federal declaration. If and when we do receive that, that's when FEMA programs are initiated. We move forward with an applicant briefing, and at that meeting, we just discuss applicant and facility work and cost eligibility of private PNPs, organization and facilities, the process for documenting projects, record keeping and documentation requirements, as well as special considerations such as insurance requirements, hazard mitigation, and environmental considerations. So if anyone has been in a disaster, you know that the applicant briefing is a meeting with a lot of information. From there, we submit our request for public assistance, and typically once that's submitted, FEMA will move forward with their exploratory call. They will call and talk to the applicants the recovery scoping meeting, moving forward through project formulation. Project review obligation is when you have your project obligated and paid out. And then ultimately the last step is closeout. So when I talk about the new model, I'm looking at pretty big changes in what I just turned orange. You can see there's some numbers up there for Blue Sky Day and the 2s for next week. But the orange steps are what will be changing, and we'll talk about that. So just keep in mind that's going to look a lot different if we are to have a disaster this year, that you guys are ahead of the game and getting the information first here. Hopefully things will go a little bit smoother. So our guidance, what we call the PAPA G, is a Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. If you were in a disaster prior to 2016, this document didn't exist, and all policy guidance was found in what we call the 9500 series, and it was separate policies and documents for almost anything you could think of, from the 50% rule for bridges, to debris removal, to mold remediation. They all had separate policies, and they all kind of cited each other, and you had to go out and find whichever one applied to what you were looking at. As of January 2016, FEMA decided to put everything together into one nice 217-page policy guide. It is available on their website. I would suggest that you guys go maybe favorite that. It is actually a pretty user-friendly document. If you search for what you need in the table of contents and you can click on it and it just pops up right to the correct page. So in January 2016, we had a new policy guide that was applicable to disasters that occurred during that year. In 17, they also put out new guidance. And in 18, a new version came out. So any disasters that happen this year, we will be following the January 2018 guidance. And mostly the only change that did occur in this year was the addition of houses of worship as eligible applicants and updated debris removal requirements. And if you were in a disaster last year, you know that was a pretty big change compared to what we knew historically. And Donnie really will be touching a lot on that next week. So stay tuned for next week if you're interested in debris requirements. Another change going into this year is we have new equipment rates. These change every couple years, but in September of 2017, we did have new rates come out. And so for our highway superintendents, our public works people, please just pay attention that there are new rates out, and they do cover the cost itself. It encompasses ownership and operation, depreciation, overhead, fuel, all of that is included. Also, standby equipment costs are not eligible. And remember, when we're claiming equipment costs, that equipment must be in actual operation performing eligible work in order to be reimbursed. What's not included in these costs are labor costs of the operator. So those should be documented and approved separately from equipment costs. Okay, so the majority of our time now is going to be talking about the new delivery process. And I realize there may be questions on this, so like I said, please utilize the chat function or we will open it up for comments or questions at the end. So what hasn't changed? The laws, like I just said, our policies, our PAPA G, regulations, and eligibility criteria. What has changed? Our process, roles and responsibilities, tools and templates. So a little bit of background on why this is changing. In 2014 and 2015, FEMA conducted an analysis and outreach that pretty much came back and said there was a need from the locals, expressed a need for significant changes in the way FEMA implemented the PA program. So as a result, FEMA for the last 4 years has been developing a new business model for PA delivery and now is implementing those changes. The biggest, most significant aspects of the new model does provide better grants management and fiscal responsibility from the beginning, from disaster, all the way to the end of project formulation. And some of the biggest changes, and we'll talk about these moving forward, are segmenting projects based on complexity and the type of work, standardizing workflow processes. So the new PA Grants Portal technology is a new platform that everyone will be using. Specializing and changing staff roles and responsibilities, matching skill sets with business process requirements just to ensure quality and consistency as well. And consolidating subject matter experts in what they're calling CRCs to improve consistency and accuracy while building agency-wide capacity to support disaster operations. So a CRC, it stands for Consolidated Resource Center, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But that's a huge change, is the establishment of CRCs. The new PA delivery model, they did implement using a phased approach. 2 years ago, they implemented the first phase in Iowa and Oregon, Georgia, and as well as New Hampshire, North Dakota. The plan that we always heard was for it to kind of unfold by January 2018. But when the hurricanes, when Harvey, Irma, and Maria hit, FEMA did move up the timeline, and beginning on September 12, 2017, all disasters, backdating it to include the hurricane declarations, would be using the new model. So the first big change for us is what we call, and FEMA calls, and everyone calls, I guess, the Grants Portal. This is a web-based tool. In the state of Nebraska, we already have 101 of you registered in this portal, but realize that this will be the system that we must use to track all projects, documentation, and information. So we will have to get everyone registered, whether it's now, which we, of course, as a state would much prefer, or at the applicant briefings. We will have to be using the system no matter what. So obviously this is us moving from paper to electronic. This is a technology change, so there's going to be training needs that come with that. One good thing with the portal is we do have the ability to upload documentation before a disaster hits, and we are asking people to do that. If we can get our pay policy, insurance policies, procurement information, and equipment inventory in there now, that's one less thing for you guys to worry about when a disaster hits. Also, each applicant does have the ability to have one or more registered users, and we are asking for each entity to identify a primary and an alternate. We realize that there's turnover, and we would just ask that that happens. You can also use Grants Portal kind of the way you guys want it. If you're a municipality, you might have your clerk and treasurer as your primary and alternate, but you might want to get your mayor a username just so they can kind of log in and kind of see what's going on. There are different roles that can be assigned, so not everyone has approval authority per se. Some can just have viewing authority. So you guys can decide how you want to use that and who has access to that. We still will have what we call our authorized rep, and legally that's our contact through the process, and that should probably be your primary. But then realize there may be other people that need access or want access to the portal. Another big change is typically you've seen the form on the left side. Some of you even come to the applicant briefing with it filled out and turn it in there. But from this point on, RPA's request for public assistance will be submitted electronically in the portal. So you can kind of realize if we already have you guys in the system, that just makes life a lot easier rather than getting you registered and then have you fill out the RPA. It is a pretty easy process. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. Screenshots don't typically transfer the best, but it's just a couple drop downs. You do have to have your DUNS number to be able to get that processed. So now would be a great time if you aren't sure what your DUNS number is to find that. If you need help with that, please contact one of the recovery staff here at NEMA, and they'll be able to give you the website or the phone number to figure that out too. RPAs, like always, must be submitted within 30 days of a declaration. So that is something that the portal will turn off the ability for people to submit late RPAs. Another feature of the portal is that once you're registered, if your county does get declared and for some reason you might not have been involved in that process, you'll get notified of it still. So, for example, Saline County gets a declaration. All the entities within Saline County who are already registered will get notified that there was a declaration declared, and then they will ask, would you like to submit an RPA? So FEMA has kind of broke down the phases of project formulation. There's 4 phases, and I do want to say that this portal, at this point in time, will only be used for project formulation. Once a project is obligated, our use of the portal will kind of cease as it is right now. I know FEMA's wanting to move forward with a more closeout and financial side and function to the portal, but at this point it's only used for the project formulation. So from the very beginning, from PDAs until your project's obligated. So phase 1 is operational planning. That objective is just identifying our applicant disaster impacts and recovery priorities. That includes PDAs. And I just briefly want to touch on this one because I know Donnie will be talking a lot on it next week. But there have been a lot of discussions and kind of new requirements regarding damage assessments and initial damage assessments. So right now, before anything happens, we're really encouraging people to get a good operating picture of the kind of the scope and the I guess essentially how their facilities are right now. Are your bridges in good condition? Are your buildings in good condition? They need to know what the damage. Essentially, we need to be able to prove that damage was disaster related, and the best way to do that is to be able to have pictures, inspection reports, even repair records, maintenance records. So that's something to be doing right now because FEMA does look at what was the facility like the day before the disaster. And while it's not possible for us to really be able to prove that, if we do have pictures, maintenance logs, records showing that it was properly maintained and in working condition prior to an event, that typically works for FEMA. As far as preliminary damage assessments, this part at this point is very similar. We, the state, will come out and do our damage assessment. We don't typically go see everyone, but that's something that will be changing as well. We feel like we need to get out there and see all the damage to create an accurate scope. So we'll be coming out, visiting you guys. At that point, we do ask for FEMA to come join us if we think we're pretty close to our threshold or we're going to go over it. FEMA will come up, and you might see us once or you might see us twice with FEMA counterparts. But that's when we capture that preliminary damage assessment, those estimates of damages and repairs to be made. Moving through the disaster declaration, that RPA submission does occur, like I said, in the portal. Applicant briefings haven't changed much. As soon as we get our declaration, we come out and schedule those applicant briefings pretty quick. The look of that might look a little bit different moving forward. We might attempt to utilize technology. We're not exactly sure what that looks like, but as always, we'll be out doing applicant briefings within the first couple weeks after a declaration. Once that RPA is submitted, and FEMA does they assign what's now a new point of contact, they'll call you for your exploratory call and then schedule the scoping meeting. So talking about the legacy model, all of our disasters up until this point, each of you has been assigned what we call a project specialist. I know some of you are cringing right now because you have had one good project specialist, and then the next disaster you see 10 or 15 different people, and they're constantly kind of demobbing and new people coming and giving them new documentation and et cetera, et cetera. With the new model, you'll have now what's called a program delivery manager. This is a single point of contact assigned to each applicant who will provide assistance throughout the entire application process. This isn't a FEMA Region 7 person that got reassigned to be a project specialist. These people are trained specifically to be PDMGs, and they are in it for the long haul, essentially. That will be your one contact. We work very closely with them on the state as well. Looking at disasters that have occurred thus far, each PDMG is only assigned 5 to 7 applicants, just depending on the size and scope of the disaster. So they want to keep that a manageable amount for the PDMG so that they can still maintain customer service and really good communication with everyone. We do still have a joint field office. Historically, it's usually in Lincoln, or we might set up area field offices. But that JFO is going to look completely different now. FEMA, like I said, is looking at really a needs-based approach rather than people. So they're going to put people in the JFO that need to be there. So everything I've heard is that JFOs will look, instead of 180 people, it might be 50 well-trained people that are specifically there for whatever disaster type we are having. Their key responsibilities, obviously conduct meetings. They're going to help out with grants portal. I know this is going to be a big thing the next couple of years through our disasters, as this is a big change for us. And so I've been told they'll each have a scanner, and they will be walking our applicants through that process. Any troubleshooting with the portal, requesting site inspections, and identifying and just helping with any questions and concerns. I know I've heard a goal they have is to have weekly meetings just to make sure that things are getting done promptly and smoothly. So talking about the exploratory call, this has sort of happened in the past, but it wasn't ever part of the process. It kind of depended which planning specialist you happen to get. But now this is a formal part of the process. Within 7 days of your PDMG getting assigned to you, you will get a call from them. And this is just to obtain kind of general information about the applicant, disaster impacts, and just to talk about next steps. You guys as applicants during this call should be probably prepared to discuss impacts, names of counterparts who may be involved in the process. So if you're a municipality, you might want to get your public works director or your finance person, give them those names because they might be hearing from them as well. Also at this meeting, applicant representatives will learn more about the portal. If you guys have any questions, hopefully by this point you're already in the portal, and they'll show you how to upload your documentation, things like that. Excuse me. Within 21 days of your PDMG getting assigned, you will have what's called a recovery scoping meeting. This looks very similar to the kickoff meeting if you've participated in a kickoff meeting in the past. This is the first formal in-person meeting with the PDMG, the applicant, and depending on the event, location, scope, scale, the state hopes to participate in these more than we have in the past. At this point, be prepared to just discuss disaster-related damages in much more depth, determining the need for site inspections. We'll talk about site inspections in a minute. They will introduce the damage inventory spreadsheet. We actually have this spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and we will be putting it on our NEMA website to make available to all entities prior to an event. And I would just encourage everyone to use that damage inventory spreadsheet from the initial incident. And even if it's a small, maybe not a federal event this spring, but if we have a windstorm come through or a flooding event, get used to using that damage inventory spreadsheet because that will be required. And I don't want anyone to have to duplicate efforts making your own spreadsheet, then having to put it in another different Excel spreadsheet. So we really just want to get that out there to everyone to be able to get familiar with and utilize before an event. So they'll introduce that spreadsheet there, and Donnie will talk about that next week. They'll determine essential elements of information. Essentially, they will offer a list explaining everything they need. And I know some of you are smiling about this because sometimes it feels like you can't win. Like it's a moving target. You're giving documentation to different people. You give them what they ask for, and they ask for something else. So no, this will be in the portal. Everything is in the portal, which I love. So I can kind of keep an eye on everything. All communications in the portal. And So with this essential elements of information, it's essentially a checklist that you'll just go through, and that's what you'll give them. I think that will streamline a lot of our processes there, and just be a lot easier for us. I know we've struggled with that part of this. Assist with documentation upload into the grants portal, and develop a correspondence schedule, like I said, hopefully a weekly meeting. So phase 2 is the intake damage and eligibility analysis. This is capturing and documenting all incident-related damages, completing site inspections if necessary, grouping our projects, I'll talk about that in a sec, and then validating what they call a DDD, damage description and dimensions, the scope of work, and costs. So something that is a little bit different with the new model is that if a work is 100% complete and you have sufficient documentation, such as pictures, GPS coordinates, etc., no site inspection will be required. If it's not complete at the time of recovery scoping meeting, the PDMG will schedule site inspections, and they will get that information directly off of that damage inventory spreadsheet. So essentially to FEMA, if it is not on that spreadsheet, it does not exist. A site inspector, keep in mind, these are trained site inspectors. This is their only job. Like I said, they're not a closeout person from a different region that just got deployed into Nebraska. These are trained site inspectors that are experts in bridges and levees and culverts. And they will, depending on the information on the damage inventory, dispatch a site inspector to meet with you and view your incomplete work. And it's their job to gather, with your guys' help, GPS, photos, and dimensions of damage. And then they'll create a report from each of the site inspections. They'll put that into the grants portal, where you guys must approve that, saying, yep, that's the damage, that's the location, that's what it looked like. So you guys have to approve that, as well as the PDMG. I brought this up before, but another really new aspect, this will be a new thing for us, is the establishment of consolidated resource centers. These are centralized locations where essentially subject matter experts have been trained and now staffed to process our applications across multiple disasters. So what that looks like is projects will be written the same as Texas, as they are Oregon, as they are Nebraska. There's currently 3 CRCs stood up. One's in California, one's in Texas, and one is in Virginia. And from this point on, every federal disaster will be filtered through one of those CRCs. Historically, the legacy model, your project specialist would meet with you, grab all your documentation, bring it back to the JFO, the Joint Field Office, and write the projects right there in the JFO, usually right here in Lincoln. So this is obviously a big change, is that those PDMGs will gather that information, and then they will send it to the CRC. At that point, for 100% complete work, CRCs will write the damage description and dimensions, as well as the scope. If it's work to be completed, the site inspector, in conjunction with the PDMG, will write the DDD and then put that in the portal, and the CRC will write the scope. FEMA reviews will be conducted at the CRC, and throughout this entire process, the applicant does sign off and essentially approve after it's developed and validated at the CRC in the portal. So FEMA is looking at projects differently now. Historically, all projects were kind of treated the same way, but now they are dividing them into 3 lanes. The first is the completed work lane. So all work that's 100% complete, as I said before, no site inspection will be required. And I want to say that's only if pictures are adequate, GPS, all documentation is spot on, then no site inspection will be required. If they have questions, they say they still will schedule a site inspection. The vision is projects move quickly through this lane because it's already done, costs are already captured, damage, we already have our damage description and our scope because it's done. The other 2 lanes are for our work to be completed. They're dividing those into 2 different, the standard and the specialized. For standard lanes, like I said, work to be completed. That inspection will be required because it's on a damage inventory spreadsheet. And projects will be written based on estimates at the Consolidated Resource Center. For specialized projects, so these are our, big embankment projects, huge bridge projects, maybe big buildings, schools, big power projects. These complex projects that do require technical assistance will be in that specialized lane, and they'll assign people that are experts in those categories. Site inspections will be required, and once again, projects written based on estimates at the CRC. The third phase is scoping and costing. This is just validating work, validating the cost on work to be completed through projects. 100% complete projects will just go through phase 3. They don't even have to go through this one. They'll go straight to phase 4. For work to be completed, applicant or FEMA, or in conjunction with each other, will develop the scope of work and cost. This is something that has kind of changed as well, and I think FEMA is hoping to move forward with, is to have applicants really take on a larger role in that development of scope and work and costs. At this point, as a state, we're not 100% comfortable having our applicants do all of that, and we will rely on FEMA and the state to assist you guys with that. But once that scope of work and the costs are completed, documentation is all reviewed. The CRC does look at compliance and eligibility reviews like they have before. I spoke about the EEI before, the essential elements of information. This lives in Grant's portal and is a reference for all required documentation. Really quick. So you can kind of see this is in reference to direct admin claim. Down below it says applicant is claiming DAC, and then right there it just says work to be performed by applicant's employees, and then it gives them a very specific list of what needs to be included. And it's really small, but it says force account labor payroll timesheets, force account work order activity log, labor pay policy fringe benefit calculator, labor summaries. So that's all in your EEI, and then right next to it you'll just add and upload it. Also right there you can see there's a comment function. So if you have questions or you're wondering why they're asking for that, or I thought I already gave that to you, you can just add a comment right there. And this does help with, I think, communication and transparency, at least for us at the state. It'll be, nice to just be able to have eyes on projects through the formulation project or process rather than kind of waiting till the end and then finding out there's issues. We hope to be able to advocate for you guys throughout the entire process now. And moving into phase 4 is just the review process. And this is preparing projects for obligation. And this is a big change as well. If you think back to the legacy model, once the project got written in the scope, you got a copy of it, and you guys were asked to sign off on it. And a lot of times it was the scope that either you created or you helped create and the costs that you provided, and you signed off on it. Then it went through a series of reviews, and then it was obligated. And sometimes, depending on different things, whether it's insurance reductions or mitigation additions, by the time the project got obligated, that number was different than what you signed off on. And this is in the legacy model. So moving forward, that shouldn't happen anymore. Once that project is scoped and costed out, insurance reviews it inside the portal, mitigation reviews it inside the portal, environmental, PDMG, the state, then you guys see it. So at that point, all reductions, all additions should be added on, and what you guys sign off on should be the final obligation as long as it meets all eligibility criteria. So to talk briefly about initial applicant account creation, like I've reiterated, I hope, all applicants will be required to have an account. It is not optional. Obviously, let's try to get everyone set up prior to an event. It's already April in Nebraska. We know what can happen in April and May. All emails do come from support@pagrants.fema.gov. So I'm going to address really quick a question in the chat. Yes, you will get a notification in your email. If there is a need or a request or a task assigned to you within the portal, you will receive notification from that email. So please just make sure that it's not being routed to your junk or your spam folder. That will create other issues. And like I said, Webinar 3 will include a live walk through the portal. So if you could, it'll make our lives very easy. If sometime this week you could shoot us your jurisdiction name, your contact name, contact phone number, and if you would email that to me, or in the last slide I have some other emails. Just someone on my team would be great, and we can get that invitation sent out to you guys. We are really trying to utilize our emergency managers to get this information out as well. So reach out to your emergency manager if you have any other questions about it. We have sent invitations out to all of our PPDs, all of our superintendents, our NRDs. So we're doing a big push, a big training push, trying to get as many people registered as we can. Briefly, I do want to talk about the other grant program that we do have in recovery. It's our hazard mitigation grant. We administer 3 different programs on the mitigation side. The first one's our HMGP grant, and this is specific funding tied to a disaster, and we get 15% of a total PA declared federal share. So for example, if we have a $20 million disaster in the state of Nebraska, 75% of that is the federal share. 15% of that 15, let's say 15 million, would be what we are allocated for HMGP. You must have a federal or FEMA approved local mitigation plan. So if you aren't sure about that, you might not be included. You might not have participated in a planning process for one, but definitely reach out to your emergency manager if you're interested in participating in the future planning process. Another grant is our pre-disaster mitigation grant. This is an annual appropriation from Congress that's made available for mitigation. This is a competitive program nationwide. We have pretty good luck with this in Nebraska on the plan side, so if you're looking into any sort of mitigation planning, that might be a good option. And then the flood mitigation assistance grant as well. This is looking at repetitive loss claims, severe repetitive loss, and that's administered dually by our Department of Natural Resources and NEMA. And different types of projects that could be funded by that would be safe rooms, outdoor warning sirens, generators for critical facilities, wildfire mitigation. We do some property acquisition, elevation. Like I said, really a lot of emphasis on our local hazard mitigation plans and other planning projects. So if you have questions or you would like to submit a notice of intent, definitely contact the NEMA hazard mitigation staff for more information on those grants. Okay, we've come to our last 10 minutes. I'm going to open it up for any questions. I do want to say if you have specific portal questions, myself and my staff, we're doing our best to learn this right alongside you. But FEMA has an amazing help desk. I think they're open, I want to say, from 8 to 8. We've called them pretty early in the morning before. And they're there to answer any specific questions. So if we're not here, I would definitely reach out to that number. It's on the screen, 866-337-8448. Okay. Oh, thanks, Patrick. 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 to 7 Central. That's awesome. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to use the last couple minutes to answer some.